Hello, everyone, and welcome from Eternal Weekend Prague. We're going to be bringing you coverage with Skura all weekend long. We have two exciting main events. We have the Legacy main event today, which is going to be 10 rounds of Swiss, followed by a top 8 later tomorrow. And we also have the Vintage main event on Sunday. Lots of cool and special prizes. We can maybe take a look at the structure of the event. Let me see if I can pull that up on the screen. All right, here we go. So 10 rounds of Swiss today. Top 8 advances to single elimination tomorrow. Keep in mind, this is a tournament with closed deck lists, so the players are not exactly going to know what their opponents are playing, what they have in their decks. But in the top 8 tomorrow, we will be able to provide the players with the deck lists of their opponents. It is a modified play and draw. Yeah, so whoever finishes higher seed gets to start tomorrow. Pretty usual stuff, Vintage. Very similar. Can we take a look at the prizes now? Okay, well, there are some very special prizes. I believe the top 8 of the Legacy event gets a promo.
Dragon's Rage Channeler, yeah.
A very special promo of Dragon's Rage Channeler. You might remember the Ponders and Gushes from the previous years. This year we get the Dragon's Rage Channeler, and also the winner of the event will get a very special oversized card painting of a Force of Will with a different picture, and we have, I believe it's a Black Lotus for the Vintage event. So a lot of very cool prizes. Philip, what do you think? Are you excited?
Oh, certainly. Like Force of Will has even like a special flavor text saying 2023 Europe Legacy Championship. So it's a very, very memorable painting that you could hang up on your wall. So yeah, really exciting to battle it out in 10 rounds of Swiss. 700 players came today. Stacked field.
Yeah, Eternal Weekend is a great chance for people to, dust off some of the game's most iconic cards and gather for a huge Eternal tournament. And this year has been very impactful for Legacy. Not only did we get some cards banned, Expressive Iteration got banned. There was also
Ragavan is also not legal in the format, right?
The White Plume Adventure got banned. We had Mind's Desire that got unbanned.
Yeah.
But we also got some very impactful sets. Lord of the Ring might have been the most impactful Legacy set of all times, perhaps. I mean, certainly in the last memory, right?
It's very interesting because you also have cards like Troll of Khazad-dûm that, it's just a common that you could, pick in limited, but then it turns out it's one of the main engines in top decks that we will actually see this round. Because apparently, if you put a 6/5 into the graveyard, you can just bring it back, and a kind of formidable threat, unpushable, unboltable. Putting 3 turn clock on the opponent. So
cards like Orcish Ballmasters, the One Ring, Delightful Halfling,
Lorien Revealed.
Yeah, Lorien Revealed might be the most impactful card. Fourth Erlingas, as you mentioned, Troll of Khazad-dûm. So yeah, a lot of very, very impactful cards from the Lord of the Ring set. Also something from Wilds of Eldraine. But yeah, I think we can maybe take a look at the first round matchup. I think we have the world champion Javier Dominguez battling against Peter Martinic, and Javier is playing a Grixis Delver deck. Pretty typical Delver list for Legacy. There are other versions of this deck. Sometimes you can see some players run Izzet, maybe Rock Delver, but it's a deck with cheap threats, a lot of counter spells. You have Daze and Force of Will, a lot of cheap card selection and removal spells. The Lightning Bolt. Sometimes we see cards like Unholy Heat. So this is definitely one of the most played decks in Legacy, and Peter on the other side is playing Dimir Scam. Can you talk us through this deck?
Yeah, certainly. So if you're a modern player, you're certainly familiar with the black scam decks where you play Grief on turn 1 or Fury on turn 1, and you immediately make it undead. It comes back, you get another trigger. In Legacy, you play Grief turn 1, it actually dies, and then you bring it back with Reanimate. So it's a very similar scheme. Now you can also Troll of Khazad-dûm into the graveyard and reanimate that. But yeah, if you hate being griefed in Modern, you might not like getting griefed in Legacy, especially when the opponent griefs you turn 1, you have the Force of Will, but they daze you back. So, for all the people who want to daze legal in Modern, let's see how that could work out. With Grief Days backup on the very first turn. So players are shuffling up already.
Okay, so we start with the Legacy main event today. Javier Dominguez, the world champion, who brought Grixis Delver. Is that the best Legacy deck? What do you think? How would you rank the top 3 or top 5, or is it like a format where there is not really a best deck? Is it more of a circle of decks that kind of beat each other in a circle, or what do you think of the format?
Yeah, so typically you would say that there are these ancient tomb decks, blue tempo decks, combo decks, and they try to beat each other up, creating this kind of rock paper scissors metagame. But Grixis Delver has always been on the very top, and it hasn't really changed. Now there are different flavors of blue tempo decks, because between Grixis, Rug, Blue Red Delver, like you've mentioned, you've also got the Scam variants, which also add to this dynamic. Now, interestingly, in this matchup, I think Grixis Delver will have a pretty big issue once Scams, for example, Troll or Murktide Regen resolve, because the Scam list has got Brazen Borrower, or more importantly, Petty Theft, to get rid of the Javier's Murktides. But Javier doesn't have really removal for the opposing Murktide. So counter matching will be much more important for Javier than Petr.
Okay, looks like both players are shuffling up for game on. Javier is ready with his opening hand. So this format is actually, if you're going to try Legacy and you are mostly a Modern player, Delver is one of those decks that is very close to Modern, right? Like if you think of, is it a Murktide? You just replace some of the threats. You replace Ragavan with Delver. Obviously, you add fetch lands into the deck, which are very important because not only do they combo well with Urza's with Mishra's Bubble triggers, they also combine well with fetch lands, obviously, with Brainstorm. But basically, it is a very similar deck. You have Murktide, you have some cheap counter magic, some cheap removal, and a lot of card selection. Dimir Scam, very similar cards, but different threats.
Yeah, exactly. Like you could look at it through modern lens as if it was Blue-Red Murktide versus Rakdos Scam. Just kind of look at that archetypical pattern of what's going on. And so we've got Volcanic Island Pass, so playing it pretty slow. Petr will see if he's got the very aggressive turn 1 thing. No, it's just Ponder, just getting some card selection in. And depending on the hand, this could be looking for lands, this could be looking for a threat. Now Ponder can shuffle the top 3 cards, like we see right now, which essentially means Ponder has looked at 4 cards, getting really deep compared to, for example, modern cantrips like Consider.
Yeah, remember that Legacy is a wasteland format. So these decks typically run around 18-ish lands with all this card selection. So starting with a turn 1 dual land can get you sent back with a wasteland, but obviously there's so much card selection that it's not that hard to find your sources of mana.
Yeah, exactly. Now, out of these 18, 19 lands that you've mentioned, most of the time we include wasteland in that count, so they are very, very low. And I wouldn't be surprised if this game devolves into some weird, wasteland then Daze you, and just very low resources game.
What I think was very interesting here is that Javier opted to cast Brainstorm at the end of Peter's turn.
Yeah.
And previously, you would see players typically wait with Brainstorm until turn 2 when they can crack a fetch land and shuffle the unwanted cards back in. But now that we have Orcish Bowmasters in the format, this gets a lot trickier, because if you wait until your opponent has access to 2 mana, if you cast a Brainstorm, that can go very, very wrong.
Yeah, certainly. We can also see that Petr's mannerisms are very interesting. Tapping the fetch lands before sacrificing it. That's not something you see very often.
It's true. Yeah, I noticed this in a draft recently. I thought that you could I had a bunch of treasure tokens, and I was tapping them to some of the white cards that said tap 2 artifacts to do something. And then I wanted to crack the treasure token and still cast one of my spells. And I realized I can do that because you actually need to tap the treasure and then sacrifice it, which just never comes up, but that's actually how it works.
Yeah, and now we see Grief pitching Troll of Khazad-dûm. Now, if Petr has nothing else, he's just a 2-for-1 to himself. Now, Javier had brainstormed, and he knows one card on top right now. So if he had stacked it properly, the Delver is flipping.
Yeah, that's the beauty of Legacy. You have so many ways to manipulate the top card of your library, and even if you don't have any of the cards like Brainstorm, you can still take a look at the top card with Delver, then crack one of the fetch lines if you don't want the card, you want to reshuffle it. But yeah, this is a format where you don't really have the cards like Undying Malice, but instead you are typically using cards like Reanimate to bring back the Grief, because it also works with Troll of Khazad-dûm.
Yeah, it also helps you with the timing, because if you need to do it on the stack, it's much more restrictive than if you can just wait, see what happens, and then reanimate at your own leisure. Now, crucially, when you look at the wording of reanimate, you can put a creature from a graveyard onto the battlefield. So you could, for example, in a mirror, take the opposing player's troll or grief.
Yeah, that sounds very, very relevant. You can also discard something from their hand and immediately take it.
Yeah,
to take it. Yeah, that's something that definitely comes up. Yeah. So what happened here, I think, was that Javier revealed Stern Dismissal, which flipped the Delver, but then he used the fetch land still in his upkeep to shuffle it away and draw another card.
Exactly. That's a really good heads up play. You know what's on top, but you stop yourself in the upkeep before the actual draw step. Now Badlands gets dropped, 3 mana for Petr, passes the turn. So I think that Grief was like a very preemptive measure, because there is no follow-up and he just 2-for-1 himself. Javier, 4 lands in play. That's not something you see very often from a Legacy Delver. Orcish Bowmasters.
Yeah, there's Orcish Bowmasters, one of the most important Legacy cards. Previously, I would think that Brainstorm was the best Legacy card by a very significant margin, because it allows you to do so many things. It basically works as Ancestral Recall sort of with the fetch lands. But now Orcish Bowmasters is definitely having maybe even more of an impact on the format. I was recently looking at Death and Taxes deck, and Spirit of the Labyrinth used to be one of the cards that people played a lot in these decks.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of making, you don't really see it that often because of Orcish Bowmasters, but there are so many other X1s. You're still running Talia, you're still running Mother of Runes, so you can't really avoid that. But if you can try to limit the number of X1s in your deck because of Bowmasters.
Yeah, and here we see a very interesting dynamic. Namely, you want to be the last person to cast the Bowmasters. So Petr played Bowmasters, trigger, Javier says, respond, kill your Bowmaster. And right now, Petr says, okay, Bowmaster, I will be the last one to do it. Ending up with a 2-2 army, potentially smashing in. Now, Javier has got 4 power on the battlefield. Petr has 3, but has lower life total. So I think Petr is still on the back foot here.
Yeah, Delver, cheap threat, keeps attacking for 3. Flipping it in Legacy is super easy. If you're trying to play Delver like me in Standard, in the mono blue deck, you typically have like a 30% chance to flip it. So
yeah.
without fetch lands, without brainstorms and all that, it's a lot different.
Okay, so yeah, multiple lands in play there. 2 mana. Murktide Region, but I don't think there are many spells. There's like a Desponder from the early game. So this could be like a 4 for Dragon, which is conveniently enough to block Delver. Whoa, that's a new way to exile things.
And it's also conveniently big enough to survive a Lightning Bolt. I'm looking at Javier's deck list. I don't think he is running Unholy Heat. I see one Stern Dismissal that has been shuffled back into the library. I don't see any cards like Fatal Push, so...
There is Molten Collapse, which is a card from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan.
Okay.
That could potentially come in handy. Basically as a Dreadball. This is the way we should be looking at it.
Yeah, the thing with Legacy, and especially with Delver, is that this deck, it's not unusual for this deck to look at, over half of the cards in your deck throughout a game because of all the cheap card selection. You have Brainstorms, you have Ponders, you have Fetch Lands, you also have a Dragon's Rage Channeler. So you keep looking at more and more cards. And even if you have some silver bullets in your deck or in your sideboard, it is typically not that hard to find them thanks to all the card selection and all the DRC triggers and Mishra's bubbles and all that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why you will see a lot of one-offs in the sideboards of these blue decks. Because, as you said, you are bound to find it sooner or later. Okay, so now we see Ponder, Shuffle, draw a card. I can see a Lightning Bolt, I think a Daze as well. We've got a 4 for Murktide, so we could like attack in and then bolt it. But Javier opts not to. Attacks with a 1/1, no blocks from Petr, not walking into that Lightning Bolt.
Yeah, so what does that mean? You're going to attack a 2/2 into a 4/4 flyer, but you're going to keep your 3/2 flyer home. Yeah, that has to signal I have a burn spell. I am willing to sacrifice my token because I can make a new one later on, but I'm not willing to sacrifice my 3/2 flyer. So Peter reads the situation pretty well, says, okay, well, I know you have a lightning bolt, but he is falling into the territory of having 8 life. At some point, you're going to have to block. It's not like you can keep taking those 2 damage. So at some point, he is going to have to block, and I think Javier realizes that we might even see Javier send everything in on one of the future turns.
Yeah, and Javier has an interesting situation because he really wants to put back double land, but then he doesn't have a way to fetch it away. So he decides to put Wasteland back, but then essentially now he's got 4 lands. He doesn't need 4 lands, right? So you either shuffle everything away, draw a fresh one, or keep Wasteland, which actually does something. For example, cast the opponent off of red, but you've got 2 dead cards on top. So tricky situation. Javier doesn't have a lot. Daze is really not a relevant card now. Now we see a Brainstorm. Brainstorm, Daze, Reanimate, Swamp. Unfortunately, Reanimate has a key clause on it, which says that you lose life equal to the mana value. So I highly suggest not targeting the Troll of Khazad-dûm. You could target Grief. Doesn't block Delver, but at least blocks the token.
And I don't think that Peter has a fetch land available, so he's going to be sort of Brainstorm locked with 2 cards on the top of his deck that he does not exactly want at this moment. So I think Javier is firmly in the driver's seat right now. What would you play if you played the main event yourself? What deck would you choose?
So it depends how much preparation time I have. If I could just magically know all the decks perfectly, I would play Doomsday. Easy. Okay. I think this deck is just excellent, deep. I love this deck. I keep fanboying it. But if I actually had to play tomorrow, I would probably bring like an Uropile or like a Grixis Delver type of shell. Yeah, just playing blue decks comes natural to me. No, counter magic threats. I also play Murktide in Modern, so that would just make sense. What would you bring?
I would probably play Grixis Delver myself. I just like the combination of cheap threats, card selection, and also the cheap counters. So that's also like the type of Magic I really like to play. And in Legacy, there's so much more to it. It's not just the deck that has these cards, but with all the the fetch land plus Brainstorm combo, with all these triggers, the way you stack the cards, the way you sequence the cards, I think you can get so much more out of the deck if you are well practiced with it.
Oh, double dazing the opponent on turn like 7. It has to feel really bad. Now, what's interesting here is you can pick up your land with Daze and then shuffle it away with Brainstorm. So you could have these type of sequences that actually gasses you up.
Yeah. That's a great point.
Yeah, so double land for Javier. Of course, every duel is blue because you really need that blue mana.
I was recently writing an article about bluffing, and I kept basically mentioning that I think people over bluff I keep an extra land in my hand just to, pretend that I have a counter spell or a removal spell or something along those lines. And in a lot of the situations, it's like, well, if you had a good spell, you would have already played it, so it doesn't make any sense. And you should just rather play the land. So if you draw your, card draw spell into another card draw spell, like if you're playing, is it Phoenix in Pioneer, you draw Treasure Cruise into another Treasure Cruise, you want to be able to play the lands. But here, Legacy is one of those formats where keeping some lands in your hand might not be that bad, because if you end up drawing a Brainstorm, that can be to your advantage.
Oh, and then we're seeing Reanimate on Orcish Bowmasters, opposing Orcish Bowmasters, targeting DRC. Now we're checking if there is Delirium. We've got land, instant, sorcery and creature. So Javier says, yep, resolves 1 damage marked on my DRC. And I think he's lining up some potential attacks and blocks. Because we're still in the main phase, right? This is the only moment you can cast Reanimate.
Okay, so Peter decides to attack with the army token. That brings Javier to, I think it's 7 life.
And that Murktide, don't forget, it still exists.
Oh yeah.
On the bottom of the screen. Yeah, exactly. And now we see Bolt U, trigger DRC, ditch the DRC.
So that was in the upkeep. So Javier could sort of manipulate the top card of his library, cast a lightning bolt. If I like the card that's on top, I'm going to keep it there and draw it for my turn. If I don't like it, if it's a land, if it's a daze, something I'm not going to be able to use, I'll just put it in my graveyard and draw something else. I think the 2 flyers are going to. It's a 2-turn clock. I think our life total might be a little bit frozen or not updated.
Yeah.
But
I think Petr may have missed the reanimate life loss because he was surprised that he'd be dead from this attack.
Okay.
But he indeed very much is dead, and Javier takes it down. Pretty dominant game, I have to say.
Yeah, that was. I mean, I think both players drew a lot of lands and a lot of dazes that didn't really do all that much. So it was more about the threats rather than, this long game with somebody hard casting a Thrall of Khazad-dûm. Like Javier basically won because he had 2 big flying threats, and once you actually put something into play in Legacy, there's not that much removal. It's mostly the counter spells. If the Orcish Bowmasters can't kill the creature because it's 3/2, then there's usually not that much to get them out of play. What do you think these players are going to be looking for in their sideboards for a matchup like this?
Yeah, so I can immediately see Javier pulling out the Force of Wills, because typically in that type of a matchup where we're low on resources, and they were indeed low on resources at some point, you cannot really afford to 2-for-1 yourself. And hard casting Force of Will is not like hard casting Force of Negation, right? 5 mana is a lot of mana, especially here in a Wasteland mirror match. So you're taking out the card that 2-for-1s yourself, and then you bring in cards that actually can lead a proper game. So for example, Pyroblast could be sided in because it tags Murktide Regent both on the stack and on the battlefield. Brazen Borrower. Also, if you're very cheeky, you can just counter a turn 1 cantrip, hoping the opponent chokes maybe a bit and doesn't have a good follow-up after. So yeah, I think Force of Wills come out, Pyroblasts come in. You could consider counterbalance as well, considering the opponent's curve probably is 1-ish. So that's one way to do it. And we can actually see the sideboarding process, Delver out as well.
Yeah, so what is Javier thinking in regards to Orcish Bowmasters? Obviously, well, I would prefer not having X1s in my deck. Is the thinking process that Delver, I have to wait at least 1 turn to flip it, so there's always going to be a window for you to kill it with the Bowmasters. Whereas I can just wait a little bit with my Dragon's Rage Channeler, and if I have a full graveyard, I can play it. At that point, it's going to be bigger. It's going to survive your Bowmasters. Is that what Javier is thinking here?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a really important skill to be able to be patient with the spells you play, because it's really tempting to just run out your spell turn 1. It's really, really tempting. Play your DRC, play your Delver turn 1, maybe on the draw. But sometimes you just really have to be patient and treat DRC as a, let's say, turn 4 play, which is then very, very strong. A 3/3 flyer that surveils is a really decent threat.
Okay, so what is Peter going to be sideboarding? If you're playing Dimir Scam, what if you have something like Leyline of the Void in the sideboard? Would you bring it in for a matchup like this? Like you realize your opponent's graveyard is important for the Delirium cards, like perhaps they only have DRC, perhaps sometimes they have Unholy Heat. What are you thinking? Is it a Surgical Extraction matchup? Are you bringing in some extra counters? Maybe the removal spells Fatal Push looks like a decent card. What do you think?
Round timer
Yeah,
ended.
so actually referring to your Leyline point, I think I could, but purely because I'm Scam, so I can pitch it to Grief if drawn later. So that alleviates that huge downside that otherwise Leyline could have. But I think in this case, you are really happy to side in Dottie Voidwalker. That's both a threat and Leyline effect, essentially, which is pretty decent. You could side in Palantir of Ornithanc. That's a mouthful. But it's a 3-mana artifact that basically allows you to scry to every end step, and then either you draw a card or you mill cards and then burn your opponent. Now, it's the opponent's choice which one happens. So it's burn or draw. But this could be in these kind of long games because Javier will have an issue dealing with a artifact permanent on the battlefield. We could also see Shieldred's Edict to get rid of the Murktide Regent, and his own Red Blast effect.
Okay. So looks like both players are shuffled up for game 2. And one thing I want to point out is that you mentioned Force of Will typically gets boarded out in a matchup where there is a lot of threats. So there is way too much for you to try to counter. You don't want a 2-for-1 yourself, especially if the opponents have card like Pyroblast or other ways to counter your force as a 1-for-1 way. But I see 2 forces still in Peter's hand. Does Dimir Scam have something they really want to protect? Is this a different type of game from their side? Why do you think Peter kept the forces in?
Yeah, so I think he may have actually kept just a few forces and happened to draw all of them. I can see that he misshuffled the deck and has to, yeah. So the main thing is that as Petr, you already 2-for-1 yourself with Griefs at points. So you might actually lean into that very, very aggressive game plan where you go turn 1 Grief with protection up and then try to ride it to victory. Or maybe protect the troll. So basically Petr is saying, I want to approach it as the aggro deck. And Javier says, well, let's play a longer game. More card advantage, attrition-y.
Lorien revealed one of the most impactful cards from the new set. Basically, not only can you get an island with it, which is an island card, so you can get your Underground Sea. It also shuffles your library for Brainstorm after you put the cards you don't want on top, but it's also good in the late game, and it also pitches to Force of Will. Like this card really does it all.
Yeah, and we saw for a brief moment an Andrea Mengucci token on the battlefield, and that indicated the Mishra's Bubble draw. And I think that is pretty humbling to see that the world champion acknowledges that he could miss that. So why not just help yourself with a reminder? I remember myself when I played Bubble first a couple of years ago. I literally had a huge printout, huge piece of paper just on the battlefield saying Mishra's Bubble trigger, so I would never miss it. So yeah.
Can you explain to us the interaction with Mishra's Bubble and fetch lands? How do you usually proceed? What if it's turn 1? I see a lot of players. Whatever set that was when Mishra's Bubble wasn't the set also had Evolving Wilds, and I remember limited games where people wouldn't really understand how this works. But yeah, look at this. What's
going on? Okay, so let me walk you through this. So we had Orcish Bowmaster. Javier says, okay, let me kill your Bowmaster. It will be the last Bowmastering. And then we saw Daze, Force of Will, Daze back. Javier has no lands in play. It's turn 2. This is unreal.
Was that double force? Oh, that was 1 force. So Peter
force
is down on
cards.
Yeah. Peter's down on cards. Javier doesn't have any lands in play.
And we've got just 1/1 army tokens on the battlefield. Wow. Okay, that's a wild situation. Now, coming back to your question, basically, Mishra's Bubble allows you to look at any top card of your or the opponent's library, and then draw that card at the beginning of the next upkeep. Now, if you look at your own top card and you say that you don't really like it, you can then shuffle that away with your fetch land and draw a fresh one. So basically, that's like a 0-mana opt. You could look at it that way, which makes it really strong.
So basically, what makes sense to do with the Mishra's Bubble is target yourself instead of your opponent. A lot of players, I see a lot of players who just, who are just excited to take a look at their opponent's top card, maybe learn something more about their deck. But in these decks, in these formats, it is typically better to target yourself so you can shuffle it away if you don't like it. And I think there is Javier with 2 forces as well. So yeah, like you mentioned, maybe both players kept a couple of forces, but kind of just happened to draw both of them at the start of the game. What does Javier do in this matchup about about Murktide. Murktide is a very big threat that if you're playing red removal spells like Lightning Bolt, you're not going to be able to kill that later in the game. So what does Javier do about Peter's Murktides in this matchup?
Yeah, so he's got a couple of ways to deal with it. So he's got Molten Collapse, so the Ixalan version of Dreadbore. He's got Stern Dismissal, but these only amounts to 2 copies total with Molten Collapse. He has got Pyroblast, and I think this is going to be the most efficient and foolproof way of dealing with Murktide, regardless of whether it has resolved or whether it's on the stack or on the battlefield. Now we see Sanctuary play tapped because it has a very steep requirement of needing 3 other islands. So Mystic Sanctuary banned in Modern, unfortunately, but very much legal in Legacy. You can play it, on like a turn 4, turn 5, turn 6, and just buy back a Ponder if you want some card selection, and maybe buy back, Soren's Ransom, Shieldred's Edict, and now we see Reanimate and Spell Pierce. In a format where people self-daze so much, Spell Pierce longevity is much better. So yeah, Ponder on the battlefield, on the stack, and we'll keep all of them. So it's the second Ponder in a row. We keep everything on top. DRC pass. So now Javier, I think, has a lightning. Yeah, so it's Lightning Bolt, Force of Will, Brainstorm. Plenty of gas still in the tank.
Well, Hydroblast was brought in by Peter. How many targets do you have in the Grixis Delver deck? You have the Lightning Bolts, you have the DRCs, as you mentioned, Molten Collapse. Is there anything else that's red? Is this enough to just bring those in?
So I think it's like a level 2 approach where you want to Hydroblast the Pyroblasts.
Okay.
That Javier would be bringing in, which is pretty decent, right? You're just a step ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a good lesson too. You don't just sideboard against your opponent's game 1 deck. You sideboard against their game 2 deck. So you have to take into account the cards they're going to bring out of their sideboard. And in this case, as you mentioned, Peter realizes that Javier is going to be bringing in his Pyroblast to counter his forces, to counter his Murktide. So it's a preemptive measure to also be able to counter those.
Yeah, and now we see Murktide Region on the stack. 5 counters, huge threat. Now Petr is a blue-black deck largely. Now I'm just looking through his deck list and I cannot see any red blasts actually. So he has to have like Petty Theft, has to have like Snuff Out, Shieldred's Edict. But it's going to be, Shieldred's Edict now on the stack, and Force of Will comes in perfectly handy.
Yeah, what happened with Snuff Out? Snuff Out was one of the, one of the very popular removal spells in the format earlier. But since it destroys a non-black creature, is it perhaps not as good anymore?
Yeah, because not only does it not kill, for example, Orcish Bowmasters, but it doesn't kill Grief. It doesn't kill the Troll. So it actually doesn't kill most of Petr's threats. It kills Murktide, but that's about it. So, now it's an 8/8 running, or flying rather, 2 mana, another Shieldred's Edicts. Peter says, yeah, hope that works. Javier brainstorms in response, so he was waiting on that brainstorm. Pyroblast, that doesn't do it. But we've got, I think we're putting back potentially, Pyroblast and Surgical.
Okay, so Javier brought in Surgical Extraction. What do you think about Extraction in the matchup after sideboard?
So normally in these types of matchups, you don't want Surgical because you're losing a card and they don't, right? When you Surgical something that they have played. However, if you Surgical something in response to Reanimate, then you're actually at least even on cards, and you take away all the griefs. So that makes much more sense. Now we see a card that is a reader, and this card is Palantir of Orthanc, a card that I thought we could see in play. Lords of the Ring card. Again, at the beginning of Petr's end step, he scries 2. That always happens. And then Javier has to decide whether Petr draws a card. If he draws, he draws. If he doesn't, then Petr mills X cards, where X is the number of counters on that card, and then Javier loses life equal to the value. Pretty complex, pretty weird, but the moment you've played with this card a bit, you get the hang of it.
It's basically a value card, right? It's a card that you use to get value over time. These games typically go long after sideboard. Both players have a lot of removal. They have a lot of counters. So you're just looking for something that's going to give you that continuous value. And artifacts are typically hard to deal with in a format like this. Although with a card like Daze in both players' decks, casting a 3-mana card that can usually feel too good.
Okay, so so Javier says I want to deny the valueness of that card, and will make you mill and lose life. Now it works for the first, let's say, 2-3 triggers, but at some point you will just be losing too much life. Petr's deck also has very high life, has mana costs. For example, Troll costs 6, Murktide costs 7, right? Grief costs 4, Lorien Revealed, Force of Will. So Palantir, saying mill could be really difficult, really sketchy. Potentially game losing. And actually, Petr wins this game. Wow. Okay, I did not expect that after seeing a forced through Murktide Regent, but Palantir of Orthanc pulls through. Nice.
Yeah, I think Javier ended up drawing a few too many lands or cards that didn't really matter all that much. He hit a Lightning Bolt Pyroblast that wasn't able to answer the Shieldred's Edict. And that Palantir at the end gave Peter too much value and would eventually kill Javier. So we're back to sideboarding.
Yeah, we'll see. But they don't seem to be changing anything. So they are not adjusting after that game or play draw. So they're probably keeping or maybe not. Maybe Javier prefers, maybe forces instead of surgicals. So I think this decision could be motivated by Palantir, that can be forced, cannot be surgicaled.
Mm-hmm.
But he's still unsure how to approach that. Now, he doesn't know how many copies Petr plays. We know he plays 1. But for all Javier knows, there could be multiple. So counterbalances, maybe on the draw, you want to cut, on the play, actually. So yeah, you were cutting this. Maybe you want a more aggressive approach?
This is interesting. So you have counterbalance in your deck. Obviously, Legacy is a format where there's a lot of 1-mana cards. You're playing all these Brainstorms, Thoughtseizes, Sword Supplishers. In this match, Delver, Reanimate, DRC. But you don't have Sensei's Divining Top, which is usually, the 2-card combo that people use together. Is that enough to just bring the card on its own with the card manipulation cards like Brainstorm, fetch lands? Is that enough that you just have the counterbalance and you're kind of just blindly flipping most of the time, or you are setting up in response with Brainstorm?
So blind flips are perfectly fine, as you said, because there are just so much cost overlap. But in addition to Brainstorm, you can also maybe manipulate it with Dragon's Rage Channeler, for example, right? Just bolt you in response, surveil, try to set up the top. So you've got multiple ways to set up the top of the library. You can blind flip. So I think overall, it is enough for Javier for these low to the ground matchups. And
I think what happened here also after sideboarding is now that Javier is on the play, the dynamic changes. The Bowmaster's dynamic changes a lot, right? Because when Peter was on the play, Javier is on the draw. Peter goes land go. Javier plays Delver. Peter untaps and plays an Orcish Bowmasters. That instantly kills the Delver, and Javier basically doesn't have a great window to play it at any point during the game, when Peter wouldn't be able to just answer it with Bowmasters. So now that Javier is on the play, he is the one to play his land number 1 first, followed by Peter going land number 1 himself and passing the turn. So Javier then untaps, and then he can have counters ready. He can have Force of Will, Daze. He can have there's a lot of ways this can work better for Javier on the play than on the draw. So I think the Delvers made it back.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, absolutely. And so that's why Javier might want to be just more aggressive overall, right? Delvers naturally lean into a more aggressive game plan. And so, players are shuffling up. I think they both really don't want to mulligan. because both, for example, Petr can grieve the opponent, so that's punishing. Also, Petr has got pitch spells, so he cannot start on a 5-card hand and then pitch because he's left with nothing. And also, if you keep the Force of Wills, that's another thing that pitches cards. So you either have to put the pitch cards back, or you're just left with very minimal resources. Javier has got 3 lands, 2 fetch lands, Channeler, Bowmasters, Bold Days.
It's a good hand, right?
Yeah, I think he's kept, and Petr's mulliganing. You'll go turn 1 Channeler, and then turn 2 you've got Bowmasters, Hold Up Days. So yeah, that's decent. Now, what you'd really like is like a cantrip. Like if one of the lands was a cantrip, you could actually maybe turn on DRC a bit earlier.
Given that you have Days in hand, is there any consideration for Javier on his turn 2 to just cast the Bowmasters right away? Let's say Peter starts with a turn 1 Ponder, maybe something along those lines. If you're Javier, is there any consideration to just playing the Bowmasters right away so you can use your Days to try to force it into play? Or would you rather try to wait for your opponent to try to cast a Brainstorm into it, or to just keep it in your hand until after they play their own Bowmaster so you could kill it? Or what does usually go through your head when you are considering these options?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because you've mentioned all of the upsides and downsides. Because I'd be really, really tempted to wait for the opposing Bowmasters or Ponder, certainly. But I think I would deploy it right away, because then I can daze the opponent's Bowmasters, essentially paying 0 mana for opponents 2, getting ahead very much. So I think I just actually bait Petr into Bowmastering it himself, I think. Yeah, so right now, yeah, Petr's drawing a card. And let's see what happens now. DRC's coming in just for 1. Petr at 18. And considering his options, hand is full of cards. I can see Hydroblast that could take care of Channeler. There might be some cantrips as well. He is considering his options. I think they've got plenty of time on the clock as well, so that shouldn't be a big consideration. Ponder on the stack. Javier couldn't fetch faster. We might see a situation of countering the opposing Ponder, but no, it's Bowmasters in response. Bowmasters in response, shoot you for 1, get a 1/1 army, then you draw a card of Ponder, shoot you again, get an even bigger army. And right now it's already 4 power on the battlefield. So let's see what happens with that Ponder. Petr, interestingly, stacking cards against the deck to be able to both look at the hand and the cards. That's a nice way to do it. Okay. So now underground setup. Yep.
Javier with a big advantage now, right? He has 2 big threats in play. Now it's a question of, does Peter have a Bowmasters to try to get rid of the Channeler before it gets too big? I think there were a couple of copies of Bowmasters in Peter's deck, but I think he is...
So Petr has certainly bottomed one of the Bowmasters after the mulligan, which leads me to believe that there is at least 1 in hand then, because I think you'd like to keep at least 1.
But yeah, on turn 2, you could either try to run the Bowmasters out there, but risk losing it to something like a Daze. If you wait a turn, well, you risk the chance of Channeler already having more than 1 toughness, but you could try to play around this. There's so much that comes to my mind in Legacy. Like, you're trying to play around so many cards. Again, given that these cards usually are free to cast, it is an extremely hard format to play at 100%. Like, it's a fun format to play, even if you don't really know it. But the best players in the format are typically the ones that know all these little interactions and try to play around all these possible cards their opponents can play, especially in a matchup like this.
Yeah, essentially, like for example, catching your opponent when they're fetching and then dazing when they cannot fetch to find mana. Or I've seen even people daze when the fetch is open just to make the opposing brainstorms worse, for example. So
Okay.
yeah, you could do just so many different things. Now, Bowmasters comes into play but shoots DRC, which makes sense because DRC might actually grow out of range. Let's see if Javier actually tries to grow it out of range in response, which would be backbreaking. Lightning Bolt, Surveil, looking at the hand. And he keeps it on top, so he just, okay, that's fine. DRC dies, my spell on top is much better. Also, Javier still has got 3 power on the battlefield.
That was a great 2-for-1 for Peter, though. He
That's true.
he still gets to keep the token, and he killed the Channeler and got a Lightning Bolt out of Javier's hand.
And this is the strength of Orcish Bowmasters. Now, crucially, the longer the game goes, the worse the reanimate angle gets, right? Because you don't want to reanimate Troll and take 6 when you're at 10.
Right.
So the longer the game goes, I'm not favoring Petr.
Yeah, the scam or the evoke, the family-friendly name decks, they are typically looking for the scam pieces in their opening hand. Exactly as you mentioned, the longer the game goes, the smaller the chance that these cards are going to be effective. You want to have them in your opening hand and do something way ahead of the curve. That's how you typically win. That's also why you see these Rakdos decks in modern. With a much higher win rate if they go scam turn 1 with Grief and one of the scam cards. And yeah, here it's similar as you mentioned, but also thanks to Brainstorm and Fetch Lands, even if you draw some of these cards later in the game, when they're not that useful, you can still use Brainstorm, put them back on top, shuffle them back in, and draw something else.
Yeah, Petr might be slowly approaching a situation where he's just hard casting Grief. Because you do want to shuffle away Reanimate, but when you really want to shuffle away Trolls and Griefs and Reanimates, you will be redrawing those cards. Because the density of them is so high. Now, Volcanic Island fetched out. We saw Murktide Regent in hand, so this could come down, but it walks into a potential Shieldred's Edict.
Well, Javier casting a big Murktide straight into a possible Daze.
Yeah. Without having Daze himself.
Does this signal anything to you? Like, if you're on the other side, are you thinking, like, wow, he's so aggressively casting the Murktide here? Does this mean he's probably have his own force, maybe his own Daze? Like, is it just casting the card to just press his advantage? Like, what are you thinking?
I would say that I would put Javier on either a desperate situation, so a hand is really bad, or a hand contains 1 or 2 more bolts, and Javier wants to close the game in like the next attack, basically.
Okay.
So either of the two, I would say. Now, yeah, another. So Murktide from Petr, while Javier doesn't have counter magic, he clearly doesn't because nothing countered Shieldred's Edict. Although this Murktide could walk into a Daze, and he does.
Wow.
Oh, a Daze back. So Petr could have dazed the Murktide, but he opted to convert his Shieldred's Edict. And wow. Okay.
Yeah, that was an interesting turn of events. Yeah, as you mentioned, Peter might have just as well slow rolled the Daze there, opting to not counter the Murktide from Javier, but make sure that he can resolve his own spells on his own turn. And that Shieldred's Edict did a lot of work against Javier's board, which included a token. So it essentially killed Murktide there. Sauron's Ransom.
Yeah, Sauron Ransom, yeah.
The most important part of this card is that it doesn't actually draw you cards. So Orcish Bowmaster is not as effective against this as against the other card draw spells. Sauron's Ransom is effectively a smaller factor fiction that these scam decks sometimes play for card advantage. You can also rebuy them with Mystic Sanctuary. You can also pitch them to something like Force of Will. So a nice little card advantage card here for Peter.
Yeah, it also introduces a bit of a sub game there, right? Because one pile is face up, one pile is face down. So that makes it much more interesting. And there is one part of the card that nobody knows, which is the Ring Tempts You. Okay, we've got a huge The Ring Tempts You token at the top.
Okay.
We will see how relevant it actually is going to be. The Ring Tempts You, and Orcish Bowmaster becomes the Ring Bearer. So yeah, attacking in. Now, the Ring Tempts You, Chapter 1, let's say Chapter 1, is that creature is legendary, so Bowmaster is now a legend, and cannot be blocked by creatures with greater power. So for all the old-timers, it's a Skulk mechanic that we had some time ago. So yeah, we're skulking in. Javier looking at an uncastable Orcish Bowmaster, Double Bolt, and actually uncastable Murktide. So his main bet with Double Bolt is that Petr goes down in life for some reason, maybe reanimate.
Fetch lands.
And then just kills him in response.
Oh wow, he goes for Double Bolt on the Murktide instead. So this was a very hard situation. You really have to make a decision.
Oh no! Oof. Wow! Days on the second bolt. Okay, this is this is terrible for Javier. Yeah,
that could be the game right there. Peter with 2 incredible dazes in this game. Javier on 2 lands.
Oh, and now Palantir. That was the Javier's demise last game. Javier is at 17, so plenty of life. So Javier double checking what Palantir does. I'm not surprised.
Yeah, playing against Palantir, if you're on the other side, you have a lot of life. You are typically going to try to let them mill the cards early on, but as the game goes longer, it is going to be very, very dangerous to keep doing that.
Yeah. Also, Palantir should be on 1 counter, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, okay, now it's corrected. Okay, so it's 1 counter. Now we see Murktide Regent from Javier. This game keeps going. I'm really surprised this game keeps going. Javier was blown out like 3 times already this game. But yeah, it's not over until it's over. Days of the Top, that would have been really useful the turn before.
I think Peter has a Reanimate in hand. I don't think there's any targets, though, except for the Channeler.
Yeah. Okay. Shieldred's Edict in the graveyard, so crucially, not the hand. And this is a huge attack because Petr cannot really profitably block. So Murktide can come in for 6, down to 2.
I think the life totals are frozen. Ooh, Pyroblast, that's brutal. Yeah, I think the life totals are frozen, so keep in mind we might be operating with exactly the correct life totals, but this Pyroblast is still on the stack, targeting the Murktide, which could very easily be game for Javier.
Attack in. So I can see a 2 written down, so I think now it goes down to 2. I think we've seen full 4 bolts this game. So this Murktide has to go to distance himself. There is no burn spells to help with reach. Now we strip mine away the Underground Sea. It's exciting. What Petr really wants is Shieldred's Edict. And Murktide Regent. Wow, what a card. What a card indeed. Attack you for 3. Where 1 card has Skulk. Javier just blocks one of the Bowmasters. And now the Shieldred's Edict on top. Okay, he keeps Edict on top and hopes Javier allows him to draw. And he says,
wow, you can have it. Oh my God.
No, he says draw. He said draw. No way. Attack you for 2, kill you anyways. because Petr didn't keep a creature back to block. This is unreal. This is unreal. What just happened? What a finish.
Yeah, that was a very exciting finish to the game.
Wow.
In the end, Javier takes the game 2-1. So 1-0 for the world champion. It's gonna be a long day. 10 rounds. I think we're looking at the 9-1 record to make it into the top 8 because we have, I think, over 700 players. I think it's roughly 750. I think the event capped out, so we were just limited by space. And here we have our backup feature match again. We have Sahar Miradi against Patrick Kruzitz with the Boros Initiative deck against Cradle Control. Can you walk us through these two decks?
Yeah. So basically, Cradle Control is this kind of evolution of Elves that we saw some time ago. It's basically a Green Sun Zenith natural order deck that wants to cheat something into play, be it Crater Hoof Behemoth or Atraxa Grant Unifier. Now, it's much less elfy now because it has Elvish Reclaimer, Grist, Endurance, Fiend, Artisan that we can actually see on the battlefield. And Sahar is playing Initiative, so a deck that basically like a Stompy variant. So people might be aware of like red Stompy strategies or green Stompy strategies from the past. You want to turbo out with City of Traitors or Ancient Tomb, cards like Archon of Emeria, Seasoned Dungeoner. You've got Simian Spirit Guide to help you as well. And the idea is that you want to kill the opponent in combat whilst taking initiative and venturing into the Undercity dungeon.
Yes, a lot of people are going to be looking at this thinking this sounds like a limited mechanic, right? Why is this why is this so good in Legacy? Like, what is the why is this such a big deal? Why did one of the initiative card just get banned? Like, what's why is this so impactful?
Yeah. So it turns out that if you take the initiative early, for example, turn 1, turn 2, it's really difficult to take it away from you. And at that point, you keep getting these effects. And, for example, the third effect, the opponent loses 5 life. It's a Boros Charm plus. Then you draw a card, and the moment you finish the dungeon, you get a massive reanimation effect. So basically, you want to... I think it's actually very thematic because you do want to take initiative early and then keep it. Now, Patrick, as we're talking, plays Natural Order, fetches out Behemoth with Haste and Trample, smash with everybody, and this might be lethal for Patrick, and It is. Wow. Takes the game. What a moment to tune in.
Was that game 3?
Yeah, it was indeed game 3.
The score looked like it was 0-0, but looks like that might have been game 3. So Patrick takes the match, moves on to 1-0 with a big Crater Hoof Behemoth. As you mentioned, yeah, this deck is kind of like Elves. The natural order for Crater Hoof still works. And I think I'm kind of hoping we get to see more of the initiative decks because when I first heard about that in Legacy, it's not a format I play too often. I'm like, wait, this just sounds like, why are people making such a big deal out of something that sounds like a limited mechanic, right? But yeah, it turns out if you ever make it into the dungeon of the Death Tree or the Throne of the Death Tree, then yeah, you're obviously winning the game. But yeah, even like halfway through the dungeon, like making the opponent lose 5 life, that's already a pretty big upside. So yeah, we're gonna be on a little bit of a break for the next couple minutes. Stay tuned, and we're gonna be back with round 2 from the Eternal Weekend.